MotoGP is a year-round sport. So much happens outside a race weekend. Riders are training, teams are developing, new events are being designed, and so much more. But one of, if not the most important thing that happens, is testing. If teams and riders don't get this perfect, they'll struggle for the rest of the season. So I'm going to explain exactly what testing is and why it's so important. And by the end of this video, you're going to know everything there is to know about testing in MotoGP. All right, let's go. So why is testing so important to teams and riders? Let's take a normal race weekend. Everyone at the track is focused on that weekend and nothing else. As soon as 1 week finishes, they move on to the next. Even though a race weekend is stretched out over 3 days, it's not just MotoGP that are there. You've got Moto3, Moto2, and MotoE all sharing the same track. So MotoGP don't actually get a huge amount of track time for everything they need to do. They've got to practice race runs, quali runs, test new setups, and even do the final push to get from Q2 into Q1. If we take testing on the other hand, the only focus teams have is that day. There's no points up for grabs and no positions to be gained or lost. They're there to test loads of different things, which I'll go through a little bit later in the video. To show you how much testing can benefit a rider and the teams, have a look at this breakdown here. There's 145 minutes of total practice time for each race weekend, which adds up to around 53 hours of practice time across all of the race weekends on the calendar. Testing, on the other hand, offers 8 hours per day of track time, which adds up to 72 hours in total for all of the test days. So they get another 35% of track time in just 9 days than they do for the entire season. So we know why it's important. But what actually happens during a test day? It's quite a lot, but I've broken it down to make it a lot less confusing. Normally, it's split up into 2 4-hour sessions. Now, to be clear, that's max track time. If there's red flags or heavy rain, tough, the clock keeps running. With time being so valuable, riders just don't go around and do whatever they feel like. No, it's so much more structured than that. Here's a quick example of what a typical test day could be for a rider. During the morning session, a rider goes out and starts with a baseline run to get feedback on how the bike handles and to set a benchmark. Then they'll come in so the team can add some new chassis or aero parts and send the rider back out. The rider will do another certain number of laps, come back in, give some more feedback, they'll review the data, and this keeps happening. After they've done some chassis and aero work, they might do some back-to-back testing of new electronic systems like traction control, engine braking, or different engine maps to see what they feel like. For the afternoon sessions, there could be a focus on engine performance. Teams will review things like the bike's power delivery and top speed, and they'll also test the different tyre compounds to see which one works best. Finally, near the end of the day, the riders will do a full race practice, which lasts around 40 minutes, to measure things like consistency, tyre wear, and fuel usage under race conditions. Now, you might be asking how teams actually review data. How's that even possible when it's only the rider on the bike? Well, data is king, and MotoGP teams record a lot of it. No, seriously. Every single time the bike comes in, it's plugged into a computer, and all of the data is downloaded from the bike. Not just a few things though. MotoGP bikes have more than 60 sensors dotted around the bike to record absolutely everything you can imagine. Now, data doesn't lie, and it can cause teams to do some interesting things. Take Raul Fernandez at Phillip Island in 2024. His second bike didn't have the front wings on, and he didn't actually do that bad in the race. He finished 10th, only 3 seconds behind his teammate who had the winged bike. Now, behind the pit boxes, there's an entire team dedicated to analysing the data and seeing places where they can make the bike a tiny bit faster. But that's just at the track. The rest of the team back at the factory do an insane amount of testing as well. Things like wind tunnel testing and computational fluid dynamics to work out how to reduce the drag and increase the downforce. They'll also have dynamometers to test the engine's power, durability, and fuel efficiency. With how important testing is, it has to be strictly managed. Teams can't just go testing whenever they feel like it. Even the riders have rules they need to follow. Take the very first test day of the year, known as the shakedown day. Official riders and teams can't actually test on this day. It's only for official test riders, rookies, and manufacturers with concessions. I'll come to that a little bit later on. More surprisingly though, between seasons, MotoGP riders can't practice on certain bikes. Let me explain. MotoGP bikes are classed as prototype bikes. They are the fastest bikes on the planet, plain and simple. They've got specialized aero, near as makes no difference 300 brake horsepower, and they're all powered by 4-stroke 1000cc engines. There's no other race bikes quite like them. Some, though, get pretty close. The bike on the left is a MotoGP bike. The bike on the right is a World Superbike. They're not the same, but it's as close as you're going to get. World Superbikes don't have as many fancy electronics, nor as much power, but they still put out somewhere in the region of 260 horsepower, and are normally powered by 4-stroke 1000cc engines. This actually makes them surprisingly close to a MotoGP bike in terms of lap time. So Dorna, the owners of MotoGP, don't allow MotoGP riders to ride certain 1000cc race bikes. They're only allowed to test modified road-going liter bikes, which have to be approved by Dorna and MotoGP. Fabio Quartararo actually got penalised for testing a highly modified R1 in 2020. That's just a few of the mountain of rules that MotoGP riders and teams have to follow. But what about the testing throughout the year? Well, it's pretty interesting. We'll break the season down into 3 chunks: pre-season, mid-season, and end of season. Let's take a look at the pre-season first. Before the first round, there's 3 sessions in total. 1 shakedown test, then there's the first pre-season test. It's spread out over 3 days and everyone is allowed to ride. Then there's the second pre-season session, which is exactly the same as the first one. That's it. After those 3 sessions, it's race number 1. If teams don't do well here, chances are they won't do that well during the season. Now it's time for mid-season testing. It's so busy during this time of year, there's not that many days that they can book for testing. But during the season, there's 3 one-day tests, which are normally held the Monday after specific Grand Prix. Then there's the end of season testing. Now normally this is just a 1-day thing, so it gives everyone a chance to gather as much data as they possibly can before they disappear for the winter. Every team has the option to go to all of these test days. Some teams, though, get special treatment. More testing, more parts, more everything. And yes, it's all completely legal. Stay with me. You might be thinking this sounds completely unfair. Well, the idea is to make the racing better. This is the concession system I mentioned earlier. It's a little confusing, but I've broken it down to make it a lot easier to understand. There's 5 manufacturers in MotoGP: Ducati, Aprilia, Honda, Yamaha, and KTM. Some teams aren't doing that great. So for the teams who aren't doing that well, the concession system is designed to give them a little bit of a helping hand. The concession system has 4 different ranks. I'll explain what the ranks mean in a second. But Ducati is rank A, and they're actually so far of everyone else, there's no one in rank B. Aprilia and KTM are in rank C, and Honda and Yamaha are bringing up the rear in rank D. With the current concession system, the higher up you are, the less stuff you get. But what stuff exactly? Take tyres. Ducati are allowed 170 for testing, Aprilia and KTM get 220, and Honda and Yamaha get 260 just for test days. Ducati, Aprilia and KTM only have 3 additional test days available throughout the season, where only test riders can actually ride. Honda and Yamaha can do as much testing as they want with any rider they want. The only limit for them is the amount of tyres they have left. Ranks A, B, and C are also only allowed 8 engines with no development. Honda and Yamaha, on the other hand, are allowed 10 engines which they can develop. Rank A get no wildcards at all. By the way, if you don't know what wildcards are, they're basically additional riders that teams can bring in to race at certain weekends. For everyone else, they get 6 wildcard entries, which are allowed to use modified engines. Even aero has limits. Ranks A and C only get 1 aero update throughout the season. Rank D, on the other hand, get 2 aero updates per season. Alright, lots to go through there, but now you get the idea. Although what happens if, say, Yamaha start to dominate? Won't they then be at an unfair advantage? Luckily, Dorna thought of that, so at some point throughout the season, there's a review of how many points each manufacturer has. It's not done all that much since it's been introduced, but we'll see what happens in 2025. Because there's not that many test days before the first round, riders have to learn quickly. But it's even more important for the rookies of the season to learn as much as they can as quickly as they can. So click this video here where we go through who the new rookies are for MotoGP in 2025. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.